they are substantial in terms of an investment. Each one of these institutions, the University of Texas, our local school district, and our convention center, have leadership that believe in a lot of the same things that I spend my time talking about, that we need a just, a local, and a sustainable food system. So why can't these investments go towards those outcomes? So the Los Angeles Food Policy Council developed the Good Food Purchasing Program around 5 standards of food purchasing. It's basically saying, let's create a lens that we use to influence the way that institutions purchase food. And I'm on target today, I'll remember what those 5 standards are. They are nutrition, animal welfare, valued workforce, environmental sustainability, and the 5th one, which I can't remember. Essentially, 5 standards to think about how do we create a better food system? How do we ensure that the food is produced sustainably from an environmental point of view? How do we make sure that the people that picked the food were actually paid? Surprisingly challenging and surprisingly difficult. How do we ensure that the food that gets to the institution actually has the kind of nutrients that we want to feed the people that are eating the food? How do we ensure sort of an overall influence over those systems? So the Good Food Purchasing Program is basically an algorithm. You take all the food that you purchase, you figure out where it came from, you answer some questions, you shove it into a spreadsheet, you push a button, and it spits out a number. And the number is then correlated to a star system. You're either a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, or a 5-star institution. It's a really simple way for the institutions to get credit for the great work that they're currently doing. And it's a really simple way to help institutions set goals for how they might be able to improve their institutional food purchasing. So we're working with these 3 institutions that all have said, hey, we're already doing some really good work. We're already buying a bunch of local food. We're already feeding really high nutritious food. We're already thinking about food recovery and food waste. But nobody really knows about it. AISD, for instance, was really interested in this. They said, we are working our butts off to make this food as incredible as possible. And yet, all we hear is like how bad school food is. So is there a way that you all can help us illuminate the details about what our decisions are, and then with the end goal being help ensure that our investments will increase in terms of the improvement of the food purchasing. So we're working with UT, AISD, and our convention center. We've baselined their food purchasing, basically figured out where they're buying what food, and we've helped them develop a score for each one. Now we're going to spend the next year, which is the really exciting part, figuring out how these institutions can improve their score. For instance, all these institutions buy a lot of food from this company called Tyson. You might have heard. They do these things called chickens. Tyson, unfortunately, has a lot of labor violations. They have a lot of employees, they have a lot of things moving. Oftentimes when they have a labor violation, they'll just pay the fine. They won't address why that labor violation occurred. What the Good Food Purchasing Program does is ask each one of these institutions to send a letter to their suppliers that have labor violations and say, hey, can you guys correct the problem instead of just paying the fine? And that one letter improves their score. It's a really simple way to have a massive influence over the food system. So UT sends a letter to some of their suppliers and says, hey, we know that you have these violations. We'd like you to correct the problem, not just pay the fine. What does that really do? I mean, maybe an executive looks at it and is like, that's kind of interesting. How much do we spend? Okay, yeah, we spend $1 million with them. Maybe we'll do something. So what happens when Texas, University of Texas, AISD, and the Convention Center all send that same letter? Maybe you start to get some traction. What happens, though, when the Good Food Purchasing Program is adopted, as it currently has been in the city of Los Angeles, and the city of Austin, the city of San Francisco, the city of Oakland, the city of Chicago, the city of New York? Maybe you start to get a little bit more traction. When you start talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of purchasing, and those institutions being keenly aware, perhaps for the first time, of the actual nature of the organizations that are supplying them food, you start to have some really exciting influence. And this is nothing revolutionary. This is just simply saying, hey, can you guys actually pay attention to the law that exists now? That's all we're asking. Just simply pay attention to the basic laws that exist and know that we're watching, that we're paying attention, and that we think those laws are on the books for a really good reason. So I could talk forever about this. If you want more information on the Good Food Purchasing Program, you can go to our website, austintexas.gov/food, get a lot more information, or you could just Google or use your favorite web browser to find Good Food Purchasing Program information. I'm going to start going kind of quickly through these next two sections. I want to save some time for questions at the end. Eating food, I've already touched on a fair amount of these things. These are some of the metrics that we pulled for our State of the Food System report. 18% of the population food insecure. Again, what does that really mean? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the metric means. It's a phone call basic survey around households' ability to access food, access the kind of food that they want. But there's some other things really disturbing. When I moved to Austin, again, thinking that I was going to be, talking to South by Southwest executives and doing things like that, and I saw this statistic of 26% of children in Austin are food insecure. It was staggering. I moved from Alabama, where we have deeply embedded poverty, deeply embedded institutional racism, lots of problems. But the problems are generally on the table. Like, everybody knows, hey, this kind of sucks. Here in Austin, I was like, what? 1 in 4 kids? So I walked through the elementary school where my daughter goes to school, and I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, that's insane. And so that statistic for me, while being a problematic metric in some ways, is deeply motivating for me. And then these other things, so we have 5 zip codes without grocery stores. And this is a real big challenge. Everybody knows the term food desert. It's a great term in that it has, in the last 10 years, helped a lot of people understand that there's a correlation between the built environment and public health. Beyond that, food deserts is a really problematic term. For one, generally there's no deserts in Austin. Generally, deserts imply that there's a total lack of something, and we know, if you've ever been to Austin, there's just very few parts of Austin that lack anything. It's what I call a liability-focused metric as opposed to an asset-based metric. That just because the entire Del Valley ISD, which is 175 square miles, doesn't have a grocery store, which is a serious problem, doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing great there. And when you say food desert, it kind of implies that, there's really nothing of value there. There's amazing stuff happening all over Southeast Austin. Amazing people, a ton of great farmers, a ton of great farm workers, but they don't have any grocery stores. And that's a really complicated equation. We're working on that. But we're also, while trying to incentivize grocery stores to move into these zip codes without grocery stores, recognizing that when we, the city, incentivizes a grocery store to move into a food desert, we're going to destabilize that neighborhood. What does that mean? So a grocery store, if you mention that a grocery store might be coming to a neighborhood, you increase property values. Fantastic, great, woohoo! Unless you're paying rent. And when that property value goes up, your rent goes up. You don't get any advantages of the property values going up, but you have to pay more rent. So if we're trying to get grocery stores into low-income neighborhoods or areas that are food deserts, getting a grocery store into that neighborhood or supporting the development of a grocery store in that neighborhood is going to destabilize the neighborhood. It's most likely going to cause a lot of the people that you're hoping will be able to access that grocery store to have to move out of the neighborhood. So, policy is complicated. We don't know all of the answers. But we do know we cannot just simply look at food deserts in isolation. We have to think about the relationship between the built environment and access to social service programs like affordable housing. We have to think about food deserts in terms of public transportation. We have to think about food deserts in terms of access to sidewalks, usable sidewalks, not just a sidewalk, but what about a tree-lined sidewalk? What about all of the different things that make it possible for a low-income community member to access the kind of food that's culturally appropriate, that's affordable. So what if you drop a Whole Foods into East Austin? Whole Foods is great. I love Whole Foods. I shop there all the time. But I'm pretty lucky. I've got a pretty good job, and I prioritize really, good food over a lot of other things. A Whole Foods being dropped into a food desert is not going to address any of the issues, except perhaps job development, which is important. But it's not going to address the actual issue of food access. So we're trying to work on a couple of other things simultaneously. And maybe this is just a little map, in case you're not familiar with Austin. This is basically a map of our city boundaries with the highlighted colors showing where we know there is food insecurity based on people calling our United Way hotline to ask about how to get help addressing their inability to access healthy, affordable food. So this is not speculation. I like this map because this is like somebody picked up the phone and said, hey, I need to feed my family today. What can I do? So it's real world data. But it's an interesting illumination of what we already know about Austin. Very quickly, what you're seeing basically is the divide in East and West Austin. So in 1928, Austin created the first comprehensive plan, which was pretty progressive at the time. Austin said, we need to have some kind of vision of where the city's going to go. And so a bunch of white bearded men like me decided, well, we're just going to draw a line down the middle of the city, and white people are going to live over here, and everybody else is going to live over there. And you might be able to guess what side the white people moved to, and what side the non-white people moved to. 100 years later, what you see is the manifestation of institutional racism. And it's really powerful when you think about the southeast corner of Austin has no grocery stores. And 100 years ago, somebody decided that we're going to prioritize having white residential people live on this side and non-white industrial move to this side. So what we're trying to do with the city of Austin is think about, okay, this is a pretty heavy subject, this is pretty complicated, and we need to think long and hard about what we can do from an incentivization program point of view to address the deep divide. So what we're doing, first of all, is a thing called a food environment analysis. And you can't really see this map very well, but we wanted to know, okay, where is food retail currently? We don't actually have a map. And on top of that, we don't really know what each one of the food retail locations looks like. So we borrowed some ideas and strategies from the city of Baltimore and some good work they did in combination with Johns Hopkins, and basically developed a healthy food availability index. So we got some data collectors to go around and implement a survey at every single food retail location in Austin. It's about 960 stores. So my grad student from UT developed an app, and the data collectors were able to go to each store and basically punch in their phone, what kind of food's available, what's the price point, what's the quality, what's the sort of general overall feeling of the store, what's the general layout of the store in relationship to the neighborhood. What we want to know is, does the store basically provide good food to the people that live in the community? What we're going to do now, we just finished the data collection process, is we're going to aggregate that data into city council districts. And we're going to be able to overlay demographic information about household income, transportation, other things. And we're going to basically be able to show a much more accurate picture of food deserts. We're basically taking the term food deserts and taking it away from the USDA and creating our own deeper dive into what's the real picture, street by street, not just zip code by zip code, not census tract by census tract, but street by street. What's the reality for people living in various parts of Austin in terms of equitable access to healthy, affordable food? We feel like having this data is a really essential starting point. Now that said, we're also doing a behavioral survey because we know most low-income families travel tremendous distances to get to food. There are many grocery stores in proximity to a lot of low-income multifamily housing communities in Austin. But we know people will get a taxi, they'll borrow a car, they'll do everything short of taking the bus to get to the grocery store. I'll circle back to the bus piece in a second. So people value affordability or price point value of their food. They value cultural appropriateness and just a general sense of getting access to quality food. So if there's a grocery store down the street from you, but the food is